Chapter 15. Her stepmother laughed, and Londus's mouth hung open. The king shifted closer, and suddenly his presence was unbearable. Cindy was fighting with herself not to scream that this was a setup. She was considering telling him everything up front, but she needed to find a way to be alone with him again, and right now that was impossible. "Oh, our Cindy is so naughty sometimes, and she's always been known for telling lies, my lord. Mr. Londus has been in the picture for quite a long time, and the wedding is all planned out," Ida added, finally stabbing Cindy one last time. "Is this true, Cindy?" the king asked in an icy tone of voice. Cindy stared at him, not knowing what to say. "Yes, I'm engaged to Mr. Londus, and we're going to be married soon. This was my father's final dying wish," she muttered in a monotone voice, wanting to shout at the top of her lungs that she had no other choice, but it was too late. The king exhaled sharply, and a dark shadow passed over his face. "Very well, then. I wish you the best. It was nice to meet you all, but please excuse me because I have other duties that I need to attend to," he said with the same cold voice, then turned and walked away. Cindy was disappointed, but she only went along with this charade in order to protect him, lied to him and herself. "Who was that man?" "Someone said the king. He doesn't look like royalty," Londus stated, "and I don't like the way he was staring at my future wife, like she was a piece of meat." "Oh, Mr. Londus, you're such a joker," Ida laughed, and then pushed Cindy toward him. "Come on, you must take Cindy around, show her off to the others. You two are so adorable." Cindy was looking around for the king, but he'd already vanished into the crowd. The pain in her chest was rising, spreading down deep into her bones. It was just one night, and she had to forget about him if she wanted to keep her freedom. The longer she thought about it, the more she agreed a lifetime in prison would be better than dealing with any of this, especially Londus. He wrapped her hand around his elbow, and they started moving through the ballroom. Now and again, Londus made an effort to talk to her, but she wasn't responding much. In a matter of weeks, she was going to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with no way of getting out, trapped in a loveless marriage until her dying breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, may I have your attention? King Caspian has an announcement to make." The loud voice of one of the king's advisors spread throughout the ballroom. The snippets and whispers moved throughout the crowd, and even Cindy looked up, curious to learn why the king wanted to address his guests. Ida had gotten what she wanted, and despite the entertainment, Cindy was ready to leave. Londus kept pushing her toward the front, suddenly appearing very interested in royal affairs, but Cindy was no longer concerned with what was happening there. Sadness enveloped her, spreading through her like a storm. Mind, body, and soul. Her spirit was crushed. She finally noticed him standing behind his advisor. Caspian was by his son and the young woman Prince Eric had chosen at the ball. Cindy didn't know her name, and she was surprised to see that Eric was planning to marry someone so unattractive, considering what he'd been saying at the ball. Cindy rested her gaze upon Caspian, and again felt scorching heat spreading throughout her entire body, licking and touching each and every crevice. She knew that no one in the ballroom could tell that he was a vampire. People were so clueless. He didn't even look at her once. She knew he could sense her standing in the crowd. She deserved to be ignored. After all, she had hurt him. "Cindy, keep still, otherwise I won't be able to see a thing. My knees are hurting," Londus complained, while she was trying to stand on her tiptoes to see what was happening in the front of the room. She thought of tripping him, but that wasn't going to make her feel any better. Londus was short. The top of his head barely reached her shoulders. Cindy couldn't imagine their wedding day, suddenly realizing that she would appear ridiculous standing next to him at the altar. She didn't want to look at the king any longer, although her heart was beating fast, and only for him. But their romance ended the night she ran away from the castle. She closed her eyes, attempting to calm herself, breathing in through her nose and out through her mouth. He was so close, and yet so far away. Finally, the crowd in the ballroom settled, and everyone stopped talking. Caspian nodded to his advisor and stepped forward. "I'm delighted to announce that my son has found the woman of his dreams. Riga comes from a respectable family, and in several weeks I'm planning to throw Eric a wedding party. Of course, every resident of the Farrington Kingdom is invited. Due to this special occasion, I'm announcing a national holiday tomorrow," the king stated, smiling, and the crowd erupted, cheering for him. Warmth danced around Cindy's chest, but she had a feeling that this wasn't the big announcement that she was waiting for. Moments later, Caspian continued. "His decision made me realize that I should move on with my life as well." The king paused for a second, as though he wasn't certain if he wanted to continue, and then he found Cindy in the crowd. The heat from his gaze made her toes curl, and her breathing became labored. She wanted to shout at the top of her lungs that she didn't want Londus. They were staring at each other, forming yet another silent connection. Cindy felt that she could love this man, but it was impossible, right? It was too soon to develop any sort of real feelings for him, and yet she couldn't have been wrong. She was in love with the vampire king, and these emotions were much stronger than when she'd been with Tom. She was certain of it. "As many of you know, my wife died nearly 20 years ago, and for a very long time I couldn't accept that she was gone. I've never met anyone who could make me happy the way she did. Seeing Eric filled with joy made me realize that I need to remarry too, that it's time for me to start over with someone who will love me the way Catherine did." The king continued with his speech, and then more snippets and whispers rolled through the crowd. Cindy's heart sank, and she wanted to run to him. His voice kept ringing in her ears, and it seemed as though people around her were suddenly extremely excited that they were going to have a new queen. The king was prepared to find a new wife, and less than 24 hours ago she could have been the one standing by his side. The rest of his words faded as the buzzing in her ears became unbearable. Cindy glanced at her stepmother, who was suddenly standing next to her. She must have walked up to her earlier to ensure Cindy wouldn't do anything stupid. "He would have never chosen a pathetic creature such as you. Londus is suited to you, and he will keep you in line." Ida seemed to be satisfied with the way things had turned out, kicking Cindy while she was down. The king was still talking, but Cindy was tuning out all the voices surrounding her. She was standing, rooted to the spot, until his voice finally faded away. Some time later, the music began playing again, and everyone entered the dance floor. She was nauseous and couldn't breathe, as Londus grabbed her arm and told her that she owed him a dance. Her body didn't feel as if it belonged to her. She was numb and broken. The world she lived in seemed too cruel. Londus was leading her to the dance floor, saying something to her, but she was hurting everywhere and didn't hear anything he'd said. It felt as if she was floating away into a state of nothingness. Guests were smiling, seeming as though they were enjoying themselves while the orchestra played. No one cared what she was going through, or the fact that he was a vampire, not that they knew anyway. Her mind was tangled with questions about his age. She wondered if he drank human blood. She was a mixture of emotions, and none of them good. She knew the king had to move on, especially after learning she was engaged to that pig, Londus. But if he knew the truth, then what? More questions riddled her mind as she faded in and out. "I'm sorry. I need to go to the powder room. Please excuse me," She snapped at Londus and then pulled away from him. He was shouting something after her, but she completely ignored him. Her mind was in despair. She normally didn't cry, but this time she couldn't stop the tears as they streamed down her face. Cindy had to get away from the suffocating atmosphere, from the judgmental stares, and her evil stepmother. She found a door in the back of the ballroom and began rushing through the long, dark corridors, not knowing where she was heading. Anywhere away from there. Anywhere. It no longer mattered. Soon she didn't hear the music anymore. Her chest started to burn, so she stopped for a second to steady her labored breathing. She happened upon a marble staircase and decided to climb to the higher parts of the castle, hoping to be alone. She needed to get away from Caspian, be as far away from him as possible. She'd decided that she had to run and forget about her love for him, and that she cared more deeply than she'd even allowed herself to consider. This was her only option. The king had done something to her, twisted her heart, and now she couldn't function as she had before. Eventually, she couldn't keep going another step. Her legs were aching, and sweat was running down her face. She sat down on the top of the stairs and cried. In the past, she had always remained strong, but hearing Caspian talk about remarrying broke her from the inside out. She didn't know him. Yes, she'd slept with him, and that didn't give her the right to claim him as hers, but they'd formed a special connection. Her tears felt bitter, so she quickly wiped them away. "Cindy, what's wrong? What are you doing up here all alone, spilling your precious tears?" The voice startled her, and when she lifted her eyes, she thought she was hallucinating. Caspian was supposed to be at the ball, so what was he doing here, with her? She swallowed hard, and prickling heat scorched her skin as he stood before her. Every tiny hair on her body stood on end. She would recognize his scent anywhere. She knew he was real. He was beside her in an instant before she could take another breath. In a matter of seconds, she had forgotten about her stepmother and Londus. "Nothing. It doesn't matter. Let's go back to the ball," she mumbled, knowing that she couldn't tell him about the stolen painting. She was ashamed of her past. If he knew she was being forced into marriage, then he'd be furious. She didn't want to ruin his reputation too. "You must tell me what's on your mind. I couldn't bear seeing you with that man, so I walked away. Why didn't you say something sooner?" he asked, touching her and warming her blood instantly. "It's complicated. Please, that's all I can tell you," she said. He exhaled sharply, and she knew he wasn't going to allow her out of his sight before getting to the bottom of the situation. "No, this is quite simple. I must know what's going on with you, Cinderella. Why are you marrying this man?" He asked the question she'd been dreading. She couldn't concentrate as his cold fingers were touching her and burning her skin. They were like fire and ice. An undeniable combination she knew she would never be able to get enough of. This man, this vampire. She finally met his eyes, and her thumping heart echoed inside her head. "Because he has a farm, pretty horses, and I will have a future with him." She'd come up with the most ludicrous of answers. "But do you love him?" "Love is something I cannot afford." Her eyes were downcast as she spoke. She couldn't meet his eyes. After that, the silence stretched for some time. Cindy believed she'd given him the most truthful answer as was possible. She had been stung once before, and now she couldn't afford to love him. Not if she couldn't truly have him, be with him as she wanted. He must have understood, because he grabbed her face and kissed her hard. Cindy his mouth, losing herself completely to the only man she could ever truly be in love with.